The massive lioness thrashes violently, her golden body wrapped in the crushing coils of a 20-foot anaconda. Her desperate roars echo through the humid air as the serpent's grip tightens around her ribs. Standing just yards away, Dr. Sarah Chen clutches a tranquilizer rifle with trembling hands, knowing one wrong move could seal the lioness's fate. But neither of them realizes that dozens of watchful eyes are observing from the dense canopy above, preparing to intervene in the most unexpected way imaginable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning began like any other in the Mbezi Wildlife Sanctuary, nestled in the heart of Tanzania's sprawling wilderness. Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her field research equipment while golden sunlight filtered through the acacia trees, casting dancing shadows across the savanna floor. The air was filled with the gentle symphony of the African bush, the distant trumpeting of elephants, the melodic calls of hornbills, and the soft rustling of grass in the warm breeze. What started as a routine wildlife behavioral study would soon become an extraordinary tale of courage, instinct, and the unexpected bonds that exist between species. In less than 3 hours, Sarah would find herself standing between life and death, her scientific training put to the ultimate test as she attempted something that defied all logic and protocol. A magnificent lioness would hang in the balance, trapped by one of nature's most powerful predators. And in a twist that would challenge everything researchers thought they knew about primate behavior, an entire troop of mountain gorillas would abandon their territorial instincts to become unlikely heroes in a drama that would unfold on the edge of a forgotten mining road. But for now, in this peaceful moment, Sarah simply observed. She was documenting the morning routines of Zara, a 3-year-old lioness who had become the subject of her long-term study on solitary female hunting patterns. Zara moved with fluid grace through the tall grass, her amber eyes alert but relaxed, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever. The serenity of the moment felt eternal, a perfect snapshot of harmony in the wild. Sarah's concentration was broken by an unusual sound, a low, rhythmic drumming echoing from the forest canopy above. She looked up to see shadows moving through the branches, the unmistakable silhouettes of mountain gorillas traveling through their elevated highway of interconnected trees. This was remarkable. Gorillas rarely ventured this close to the open savanna where lions typically hunted. The troop was led by Kibo, a massive silverback whose presence commanded respect throughout the region. Sarah had observed him from a distance before, but never this close to lion territory. The gorillas seemed agitated, their usual calm demeanor replaced by an urgency that made Sarah reach instinctively for her field notes. Something was drawing them away from their traditional highland habitat. Meanwhile, Zara had caught wind of something that sparked her predatory instincts. Her head lifted sharply, nostrils flaring as she tested the air. Her powerful muscles tensed beneath her golden coat as she began moving with deliberate purpose toward the old mining road that cut through the sanctuary like a scar. The road had been abandoned decades ago when the copper deposits ran dry, leaving behind only cracked asphalt slowly being reclaimed by nature. Sarah followed at a respectful distance, her camera ready to document whatever had captured the lioness's attention. The convergence felt significant. Gorillas descending from their mountain refuge, while a lone lioness tracked something toward the boundary between wilderness and the remnants of human intrusion. The morning's peaceful rhythm was shifting into something else entirely. Above them, Kibo's deep chest rumbles grew more frequent, a form of communication Sarah had never heard before. The entire ecosystem seemed to be responding to some invisible signal, drawing multiple species toward an inevitable collision point where the ancient mining road met the forest edge. The old mining road shimmered in the late morning heat, its broken asphalt creating a patchwork of shadows and sun-baked surfaces. Zara approached the edge cautiously, her instincts telling her that prey was near. What she couldn't see was the massive anaconda coiled motionlessly in the roadside drainage ditch, its olive green and black pattern perfectly camouflaged against the debris of fallen leaves and rusted mining equipment. The serpent had been drawn here by the warmth radiating from the asphalt, but now it sensed the vibrations of approaching footsteps. At nearly 20 feet long and weighing over 200 pounds, this anaconda was an apex predator in its own right, capable of crushing bones and stopping hearts with its immense constricting power. Zara stepped onto the warm pavement, her amber eyes scanning for the source of the scent that had lured her here. In that split second of vulnerability, as she paused to investigate a cluster of rocks near the road's center, the anaconda struck with lightning precision. The attack was devastatingly swift. One moment Zara was a confident predator surveying her domain. The next she was fighting for her life as thick, muscular coils wrapped around her torso. Her surprised roar of shock quickly transformed into something far more desperate as the snake's body began to constrict with methodical, crushing force. Sarah, who had been observing from the tree line 50 yards away, watched in horror as the scene unfolded. Her scientific mind tried to process what she was witnessing, a clash between two of Africa's most formidable predators, but her human heart was already racing with the urge to intervene. The lioness thrashed violently, her powerful claws scraping against the asphalt as she tried to gain purchase. But anacondas are patient killers, built for exactly this kind of battle. Each time Zara exhaled, the coils tightened incrementally, making her next breath more difficult to draw. Above in the canopy, Kibo and his troop had gone completely silent, their dark eyes fixed on the life and death struggle below. The morning's peace had shattered into raw, primal violence. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her tranquilizer rifle, her mind racing through impossible calculations. A standard dose meant for sedating lions could be fatal to the anaconda, but too little might only enrage the massive serpent further. Every second of hesitation meant Zara's breathing became more labored, her struggles growing weaker against the relentless pressure. Her first instinct was to call for backup, but the nearest ranger station was 40 minutes away by radio, and cell service was non-existent in this remote corner of the sanctuary. She was completely alone, watching a magnificent creature slowly suffocate just yards from where she stood. Zara's desperate attempts to break free were becoming more frantic but less effective. The lioness tried rolling, tried clawing at the snake's thick hide, tried everything her predatory instincts could summon. But anacondas had evolved for exactly this scenario. Their flexible ribs and incredibly strong muscles designed to outlast any prey, no matter how powerful. From the forest canopy, an unexpected development began to unfold. Kibo, the massive silverback, started making deep, guttural calls that Sarah had never heard in all her years of primate research. His vocalizations seemed to be coordinating something, as other members of his troop began responding with their own urgent sounds. The gorillas were becoming increasingly agitated, their usual territorial caution replaced by something that looked almost like concern. Several younger males had begun moving lower in the trees, positioning themselves directly above the scene of the struggle. This defied everything Sarah knew about gorilla behavior. They should be fleeing from such a dangerous situation, not moving closer to it. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the sound of Zara's breathing. What had started as powerful roars of defiance were now reduced to shallow, wheezing gasps. Her golden eyes, once bright with predatory intelligence, were beginning to glaze over with the unmistakable signs of oxygen deprivation. Time was running out faster than Sarah had imagined possible. The tranquilizer rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands as she realized that whatever decision she made in the next 30 seconds would determine whether she would witness a miracle or a tragedy. Sarah's mind raced through a series of horrifying scenarios. If she shot the anaconda with a tranquilizer dart, the chemicals could take several minutes to take effect, time Zara didn't have. If she used a higher dose to speed the process, she risked killing the snake, violating every principle of conservation she'd sworn to uphold. But if she did nothing, she would watch a magnificent lioness die while she stood helplessly by. Her radio crackled with static as she attempted one desperate call to the ranger station. "Base camp, this is Dr. Chen. I have an emergency situation at Sector 7. A lioness is being constricted by an anaconda. I need immediate backup." Only silence answered her plea. She was truly on her own. The ethical dilemma tore at her scientific training. Both animals were protected species, both equally deserving of life. Her research protocols were clear: observe, document, but never interfere with natural processes. Yet, watching Zara's labored breathing, seeing the light beginning to fade from those amber eyes, every human instinct screamed at her to act. Above her, the gorilla troop's behavior was becoming increasingly strange. Kibo had descended to the lowest accessible branch, barely 15 feet above the road. His massive form swayed slightly as he watched the struggle below, making soft grunting sounds that seemed almost encouraging. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Other troop members were gathering branches and small rocks, though Sarah couldn't understand their purpose. The most shocking realization hit her as she watched Kibo's movements more carefully. The silverback wasn't displaying territorial aggression or fear. His body language suggested something unprecedented in her field experience. He appeared to be waiting for something, as if anticipating an opportunity to intervene. Zara's struggles were weakening dramatically. Her powerful limbs, which moments ago had been clawing desperately at the asphalt, now moved with sluggish determination. The anaconda's coils had tightened to their maximum pressure, and the lioness's chest was barely rising with each shallow breath. Sarah raised her tranquilizer rifle, her finger hovering over the trigger. In 30 seconds, it would be too late for any choice to matter. Sarah forced herself to think like the scientist she was trained to be. Panic would save no one. She studied the scene with clinical precision, analyzing the anaconda's positioning and Zara's weakening condition. The snake's head was positioned near Zara's shoulder, while its thick middle section wrapped around her torso. If she could create a distraction at the tail end, perhaps the anaconda would momentarily loosen its grip. Her field kit contained emergency flares, typically used for signaling rescue helicopters. The bright light and hissing sound might startle the serpent enough to give Zara a crucial moment to break free. It was a desperate plan, but it was better than watching helplessly. As Sarah reached for the flare, something extraordinary happened above her. Kibo began making a series of deliberate hand gestures to his troop, actual communication that looked almost like coordination. Several younger gorillas started breaking branches from the canopy, while others gathered stones that had apparently been collected for this moment. The realization struck her like lightning. The gorillas weren't just observing, they were planning their own intervention. Kibo's earlier movements hadn't been random agitation. He'd been positioning his troops strategically around the perimeter of the road. They were waiting for the right moment to act, displaying a level of tactical thinking that challenged everything she knew about primate behavior. But this created a new complication. If she acted now with the flare, she might disrupt whatever plan the gorillas had developed. If she waited for them to make their move, Zara might not survive long enough to benefit from any rescue attempt. The anaconda shifted slightly, readjusting its coils for maximum pressure. This small movement caused Zara to release a weak, barely audible moan that seemed to galvanize the entire forest. Kibo's chest rumbles became more urgent, and his troop responded by moving into final positions. Sarah made her decision. She would trust in the intelligence she was witnessing above and coordinate her efforts with the gorilla's plan. She gripped the flare tightly, watching for Kibo's signal, preparing to risk everything on an unprecedented alliance between human and primate. Kibo's signal came as a deep, resonant bark that echoed through the forest. Instantly, the gorilla troop sprang into action with military-like precision. From multiple angles, branches and stones began raining down on the anaconda's body, each projectile carefully aimed to avoid hitting Zara while targeting the serpent's most sensitive areas. Sarah ignited her emergency flare simultaneously, the brilliant red light hissing to life as she hurled it toward the anaconda's tail section. The combination of the sudden bright light, acrid smoke, and coordinated bombardment from above created complete sensory chaos for the massive snake. The anaconda's head whipped around frantically, trying to identify these multiple threats. Its ancient predatory instincts, evolved for single combat scenarios, couldn't process being attacked from so many directions at once. For the first time since the struggle began, its crushing grip wavered slightly. Zara felt the momentary loosening and summoned what little strength remained in her oxygen-deprived muscles. She twisted violently, managing to get one front paw partially free from the coils. Her claws found purchase on the asphalt as she pulled with desperate determination. Above, the gorillas intensified their assault. Kibo himself grabbed a substantial branch and hurled it with remarkable accuracy, striking the anaconda's midsection. The younger males followed suit, creating a continuous barrage that kept the serpent disoriented and defensive. Sarah had moved closer during the chaos, her tranquilizer rifle ready. She waited for the perfect moment when the anaconda's head would be positioned away from Zara's body. The flare continued to burn, casting eerie shadows across the scene as smoke created additional confusion. The coordinated attack was working. The anaconda's coils began to loosen further as its survival instincts overrode its predatory drive. Faced with threats from above, beside, and behind, the massive serpent started to make the calculation that this prey was no longer worth the danger. Zara managed to free her second front paw, and with both limbs working together, she began the desperate process of crawling out of the loosening coils. Her breathing was still labored, but there was hope flickering in her amber eyes once again. The anaconda, overwhelmed by the relentless multi-directional assault, finally made its retreat. With surprising speed for such a massive creature, it uncoiled from Zara's body and slithered toward the dense undergrowth at the road's edge. Within seconds, the 20-foot predator had vanished into the green maze of the forest, leaving only disturbed vegetation as evidence of its presence. A profound silence fell over the scene. The gorillas in the canopy ceased their bombardment, and even the ambient sounds of the forest seemed muted. Sarah lowered her tranquilizer rifle, hardly believing what she had just witnessed. The coordinated rescue had worked beyond her wildest expectations. But the victory felt hollow and premature. Zara lay motionless on the sun-baked asphalt, her golden coat dusty and matted. Her ribcage rose and fell in irregular, shallow gasps that spoke of serious internal trauma. The anaconda's crushing pressure had done its damage. Broken ribs were likely, and possible internal bleeding couldn't be ruled out. Sarah approached cautiously, her medical training taking over from her research protocols. Zara's eyes were open but unfocused, glazed with pain and exhaustion. Her normally bright amber irises had dulled to a muddy brown, and her breathing had an alarming wheeze that suggested fluid in her lungs. The lioness attempted to lift her head when Sarah drew near, but the effort proved too much. Her magnificent head dropped back to the asphalt with a soft thud that made Sarah's heart clench. This was a creature that should be prowling the savannah with deadly grace, not lying broken on an abandoned road. Above in the trees, Kibo and his troop watched intently. Their earlier coordinated aggression had given way to what appeared to be genuine concern. The silverback made soft, questioning grunts that seemed directed at the fallen lioness, as if trying to determine her condition. Sarah realized with growing dread that saving Zara from the anaconda had been only the first challenge. Now came the far more delicate task of keeping her alive long enough to recover from injuries that might prove fatal even without the snake's intervention. Sarah knew that approaching a wounded lioness was potentially suicidal, even one as weakened as Zara. But the labored breathing and glassy eyes told her that without immediate intervention, the magnificent predator would die within minutes. She had to try emergency field treatment, despite having no backup and no way to safely restrain a big cat. She pulled out her emergency medical kit, her hands shaking as she prepared a dose of antibiotics and pain medication. The injections would need to be administered directly into Zara's muscle tissue, meaning she had to get close enough to touch a wild lion who might instinctively lash out in her final moments. As Sarah took her first step towards Zara, something unprecedented happened above her. Kibo began descending from the canopy, his massive form moving with deliberate purpose down the trunk of a large acacia tree. Sarah froze, unsure whether this development made her situation better or infinitely worse. The silverback reached the ground and, to Sarah's amazement, positioned himself between her and Zara, not as a threat but as what appeared to be protection. His dark eyes met Sarah's with an intelligence that transcended species barriers. In that moment, she understood. Kibo was giving her permission to approach and offering to stand guard. Emboldened by this extraordinary display of trust, Sarah knelt beside Zara's motionless form. The lioness's breathing was growing more erratic, her life force ebbing with each labored breath. Sarah gently placed her hand on Zara's flank, feeling the rapid, irregular heartbeat beneath the thick coat. Working with steady precision despite the surreal circumstances, Sarah administered the injections. Kibo watched intently, occasionally making soft rumbling sounds that seemed almost encouraging. Above them, the rest of the gorilla troop had formed a protective circle in the canopy, their eyes scanning the surrounding forest for any new threats. As Sarah worked to stabilize Zara's breathing and check for obvious injuries, she realized she was participating in something that had never been documented in scientific literature, a three-way alliance between human, primate, and big cat united by the simple desire to preserve life. The antibiotics and pain medication began taking effect within minutes. Zara's breathing gradually became less labored, and some clarity returned to her amber eyes. Her first instinct upon regaining awareness should have been to attack the human crouched beside her, but instead she simply observed Sarah with what appeared to be recognition. Slowly, carefully, Zara managed to lift her head. Her movements were still weak and unsteady, but the immediate crisis had passed. She attempted to rise to her feet, and with Sarah's gentle assistance, an act of trust that defied every rule of wildlife interaction, the lioness managed to stand on shaking legs. Kibo, who had maintained his protective vigil throughout the medical intervention, now did something that left Sarah speechless. The massive silverback reached out with one enormous hand and gently touched Zara's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that transcended species boundaries. The lioness, rather than recoiling, leaned slightly into the contact. The moment stretched between them, three species connected by shared experience and mutual respect. Then, as if understanding that the crisis had passed, Kibo stepped back and began his ascent into the canopy. His troop followed, but not before several of them looked back at Sarah and Zara with what could only be described as satisfaction. Zara took several tentative steps toward the forest edge, her strength returning with each movement. Before disappearing into the tall grass, she turned back to look at Sarah one final time. In that gaze was acknowledgement, not of domestication or submission, but of understanding. She had been saved not just by human intervention, but by an unprecedented alliance that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about animal behavior. As Sarah packed her equipment, her mind raced with the implications of what she had witnessed. The gorillas had demonstrated tactical thinking, empathy across species lines, and a capacity for cooperation that would revolutionize primate research. But more than that, she had been part of something magical, a moment when the barriers between species dissolved in the face of a shared commitment to preserving life. The morning's peace had been shattered and rebuilt into something far more profound. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.